Mike and Michael, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
So before we dive in, can you just give us a brief overview of what Millenial Fertility is, what you guys do? Set the stage for us.
Great. So a big problem, believe it or not, these days in the United States is pregnancy. And pregnancy, even though we're in a stay-at-home mode with COVID, and hopefully you'll see a rebound in the pregnancy rate. Pregnancy rate in the United States, Europe, Japan, and many countries is down significantly as an issue. People want to have children, but the inability to have children is a major problem, not just in the U.S. The Millenial Fertility Company has a very reasonable cost or price solution to enhance the probability of increasing the outcome, favorable outcome of pregnancy versus the traditional methods such as in vitro fertilization, et cetera. And today we'd like to have the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what we're doing and why. And the name Millenial, I think in the name of the company is significant and symbolic because this very large group that is today even larger than the baby boomer group of which I'm a part of, has this very issue of pregnancy and getting pregnant for a number of reasons. And we'll delve into that later on.
So I want to add just a couple other comments here. You know, our company itself, we're focused on launching an over-the-counter version of our conception kit. The conception kit was a prescription-based solution that was FDA cleared. We want to launch an over-the-counter version of it for a number of reasons. And one of the biggest is cost. We'll talk about this a bit later in terms of the barriers that Michael references, but the reality is that the standard fertility treatment path is out of reach for a large portion of our population. And even when you look at things like a prescription version, there are many families out there who can't even afford to go to a doctor to get a prescription, or they don't live in a place where it's easy to go get a prescription. So there are a lot of reasons why we think there is value in launching an over-the-counter product, even here in the United States as a complementary version. But the reality is also that in foreign countries, that's how it will have to be sold. They don't have a prescription model for things like this. It's all over the counter. So any work we do right now in launching this over-the-counter version not only helps us here in the United States, but also helps us in foreign markets also.
And again, perhaps even just to add to that is, if you go to any pharmacy today in the United States and pharmacies outside of the United States, the pregnancy test, which everyone is aware of, is available over the counter. So why not a conception alternative in the same vein?
Mm-hmm.
That's great. And I'm really excited to kind of dive in a little deeper. Before we dive into the product itself and the market and things like that, talk to me a little bit about the team you guys have put together. Who kind of works with you? How did you all come together? Talk to me a little bit about your backgrounds, things like that.
Great. Well, I'll take a start at this. Our chairman of the board and acting CEO of the company is Harry Sandrowski. Harry is a founding member and managing director of Sandrowski Corporate Advisors, as well as a company called the Prosperitas Group and another organization called Sandrowski Selecki PC. Harry has well over 30 years of advanced business and accounting experience, including executive management, consulting with various types of businesses, including life science and medical device companies, and is a certified public accountant, and has also additional certification in financial forensic credentials. I, Michael Rosen, am a board member of the company. I spent 20 years with 3 major pharma companies, particularly working in the area of women's health and also pediatrics. I worked with companies such as Pfizer, Bristol Myers and GD Searle. I then spent a number of years as CEO of a number of biotechnology companies and medical device companies, both in Europe and the United States, and have a pretty good grasp of the global market for healthcare related products. And today I am currently providing input to Millenial Fertility as I am the managing director of an innovation and research park at a major medical school in Chicago that embraces the formation of startup companies as well as the collaboration with industry, the pharmaceutical and medical device industry. So I'm in contact with those groups on a daily basis. Mike, perhaps you want to step in and introduce yourself.
So I'm Mike Bock. I have 30 plus years of corporate experience in a wide variety of functional roles, including product management, technical management, sales operations, program management, business process consulting. I'm also a graduate of the Kellogg Business School at Northwestern and have a master's degree in health communications from Northwestern in addition. We have another board member who is, or excuse me, our medical officer is a gentleman named Dr. Galen Kelton. He's clinically active as an inpatient hospital medicine specialist at the Indiana University in a hospital in Indianapolis. He's also a former member of the faculty at the IU, Indiana University Medical School. He's literally a past director of the IU Travel Medicine Program. And I'll lastly add that he's a former ER physician, has been active in maternity care with over 1,000 deliveries throughout his career. We have one last board member by the name of Kurt Kramarenko. Kurt has extensive experience working in the pharmaceutical industry and sales, most recently here for TAP Pharmaceuticals.
Fantastic. Well, thanks guys. Thanks for giving us the background on everybody. It sounds like a really exciting team that you guys have already put together. So as we dive back into the product a little bit, talk to me about we touched on this a little bit in the introduction, but I want to go deeper. Talk to me about the problem you're trying to solve with the company before we get into the product itself, right? Like what's the issue? What brought everyone together? What kind of keeps you up at night? What's the problem you're trying to solve?
So great question and an essential question. If we look at, as in the name of our company, if you look at the millennial segment of the US population, you have about 71 million people. So how do we define millennials? Millennials are in the age bracket of age 23 to 38. That's not the full age of which couples or women bear children, but it is a major chunk of the age bracket. Obviously today, women are having children up to their late 40s. But the millennial piece of that, age 23 to 38, is over 71 million people. That's a huge bracket. And the major problem with the millennial group is the birth rate in that group is down significantly. When you take into account, first of all, that the couples are getting married much later. Used to be couples would get married in their early 20s, then moved up to their mid 20s, late 20s. Most millennials these days are getting married in their early 30s and just beginning to have children in their mid to even late 30s. So that's one challenge. A second challenge is the sperm production rate in males has been down significantly for numbers of reasons over the last 20 years. And so that's a key ingredient, obviously, in having babies. Add into that account the fact that there are many women are working today, which didn't exist in my generation of the baby boomers. And many women have careers, and so the lifestyle is not conducive to making it easy to having babies, and the trend is definitely down. there are alternatives, obviously, to that, and couples are seeking out artificial insemination via in vitro fertilization, and you see definitely a substantial increase in vitro fertilization. But the problem in vitro fertilization is it's incredibly expensive, and because it usually doesn't happen on the first try. You may need to go through 2, 3, or even 4 tries. And the other aspect of that is there usually, if in vitro fertilization or artificial insemination is effective, you have the problem of multiple births. So parents that all of a sudden are predicted, they're expecting to have 1 child, now might have 2 or even triplets. And imagine the cost today of raising triplets. So artificial insemination doesn't guarantee that you only get 1 child. And there's a high risk of multiple births at the same time, and the cost of that. So all of that makes for a situation, obviously the desire to have children is critical. They want children, they're just having children later, number one, but they're having greater difficulties having children because of sperm count, workload, activity, etc.
So let me add just a few more layers to this for you to consider. And, you know, the idea of in vitro fertilization has been around for decades now. And what has not been around is the research starting to examine the issues that people face, because that's the only choice they have, a regimen of drugs or invasive office-based procedures. That's changing. There are a lot more research that's demonstrated some huge barriers. For example, essentially barriers that reduce access. One of them is income. The reality is they've done research to highlight that 70% of fertility treatments are used by households with incomes greater than $100,000. And you think that sounds great. Well, that sounds like a barrier. But when you dig into a bit, the reality is that 94% of fertility services are used by households with incomes greater than $60,000. That's the median income in the United States. Below $60,000, only 6% of fertility services are accessed by households. Their choice is go home and try harder. It is not to access the service. The second thing is the time. Research has indicated that it takes 142 hours on average for people to access the current treatment path for fertility care. And you'd say, okay, well, what's that consist of? It's going back and forth to the doctor's office, taking time off work. If you work in a corporate job that will support that, that's great. If you don't, if you work in an hourly job, you're out of luck, because if you're not at work, you don't get paid. For some people, that's basically a showstopper. There is additional research that highlights access. Fertility treatment clinics are very, very expensive to run. And as a result, they're only in major metropolitan areas. There has been studies to demonstrate that there are 25 million women of childbearing age in the United States who have little or no access to fertility treatment solely based on where they live. I want you to think about that for a moment. They live out in a more rural area or a non-metropolitan area, and their only choice is maybe a regimen of drugs or a lot of commute time trying to make their ways to an IVF clinic. That's unacceptable. So essentially, they either can't afford the cost, they work in an hourly job, or they can't afford to take the time off, or they live in an area where they have no access to it whatsoever, even if they had the money to support it.
And maybe to add to that, Mike, we're not saying that in vitro fertilization is not a viable method for having children. It's a tried and true methodology. Unfortunately, the cost of doing that for each round of in vitro fertilization is about $23,000. And usually most patients need to go to 2, 3, and maybe even 4 rounds of this. So there really needs to be, most people can't afford that. Most people don't have insurance programs that can afford that. There needs to be a first step before you go to in vitro fertilization. And that's what our product called The First Step actually solves. A much cheaper alternative. If that should not work, sure, you could try in vitro fertilization later on, but you have a much better opportunity for conceiving at a much lower cost and usually one child at a time and not
Right.
multiple births.
So thank you, Michael. The last piece that I'll add in here is this doesn't even get into comprehending the issue of COVID-19. I don't know if any of you have seen this, but the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, which is essentially the fertility industry, trade group almost, they basically at one point recommended earlier this year stopping all new cycles of treatment of IVF, IUI, any form of treatment, solely because they didn't know how people might get ill going to the doctor's office. They've since relaxed that to a degree, but they've still said you need to take appropriate precautions because A, they don't want people to get sick, and they really don't have a lot of research to indicate how does COVID affect pregnancies, women who are pregnant. So as Michael said, we're not looking to replace the current treatment path. We're looking to offer a better first step that you can use in the privacy of your own home just by essentially buying it online and getting it mailed to your house.
So what we've told you today is just the US market. But realize that the millennial market is the baby boomer was a US concept. It was basically the US market, but the millennial segment is a global segment around the world, particularly this population group of age 23 to 38. And this situation exists not only in the United States, but in much of Europe. It exists in Japan. It even exists in China today. And I can tell you in countries like Brazil, where I am right now, it exists as a problem as well. So this is a global issue. This global millennial segment exists. It's not just a US alone segment. And the millennials around the world, interestingly enough, share many of the same characteristics: getting married later, having children later, having difficulty having children, etc.
Great. And so thanks for walking us through that. Just to try to kind of wrap it all up so I can make sure I have it straight. It sounds like there's kind of three big, in major buckets, three big problems. One is lifestyle changes are making it harder for people to have children. Current fertility treatment paths can be expensive and might not be the best fit. And then there's a big problem of access to those treatment methods, if you can afford them at all. And is that the major kind of problems we're looking at so far?
Yes.
Correct.
Fantastic. And so let's dive in to the product itself. So talk to me about the First Step Conception Kit. Kind of what is it and where does it fit in the market?
So let's first take a step back and look at what is the global fertility market, which is a huge market. And the global fertility market was just under $17 billion in 2016 and is expected to almost double by the year 2023. That's only 3 years from now. So this fertility market is growing around the world. Now that includes includes many different types of aspects towards fertility, including drugs, hormones that are part of the process. What we are looking at is obviously a smaller segment. Now, again, remember also the age group that we're targeting here, the millennial group in the United States. Remember that group is about 71 million people that are in that group, and that means at least 30 plus million couples looking to have children in that age bracket, age 23 to 38. We are actually targeting, if we look at 1% of this global fertility market, just 1%, that's $310 million a year. And, we think we would like a piece of that market, obviously, and to grow beyond that. But that's the initial premise of which we are starting with in terms of a marketplace.
So let me just add a little bit more about what is the kit actually. And at its core, the First Step Conception Kit is a cervical cap solution kit for helping people get pregnant. And I want to highlight a few quick points here. Cervical caps have been used for helping people get pregnant or to prevent pregnancy literally for decades. There are decades worth of clinical studies documenting the effectiveness of cervical caps as an aid to conception. The big difference here is that in the past, it used to be a doctor's office procedure, which means that you not only had to go to the doctor, you had to donate the sperm, the doctor would place in a cap, place the cap on the cervix, and then the woman would have to stay in the doctor's office for a period of hours in one of the rooms. As you might imagine, the doctors weren't real thrilled with that, and that's a model that doesn't work in today's medical marketplace. What changed is that we actually, when we launched the first step, the first version of this, the prescription version, we actually approached this by creating a patented technology cervical cap that's a one-size-fits-all. And not only that, we work with the FDA to get it FDA cleared for home use, meaning that we actually had to conduct clinical trials to prove that people could use, for the first time, cervical cap solution in a home environment. We passed those clinical trials. We got FDA clearance for it. So right now, this kit consists on a monthly basis of one cervical cap, our conception cap, that's patented. It has 8 ovulation predictors. It has 1 semen collector, and it has 1 pregnancy test and 1 fertility lubricant. And when you put it all together here, this kit was the first complete home use cervical cap solution approved by the FDA in the marketplace. So the over-the-counter version of this will use the exact same technology and setup, except the difference is you won't need a prescription. You'll just be able to buy it online and use it in a home environment. We fully expect FDA clearance for this version of it too.
That's exciting. And so can you talk to me a little bit about, like, is it easy to use? Do you have, how hard is it to use? Is it, can you mess up? How does that work?
So one of the things, essentially at its core, you essentially use it at home by being intimate with your partner, which is much more intimate and personal than going to the doctor's office. So you use the condom, you basically are intimate with your partner, you take the sperm, the semen out of the condom, put it in the cervical cap, and you manually place it on your cervix and leave it in place for 3 to 5 hours. One of the questions we typically see from people is, how difficult is it to place it on my own cervix? And one of the clinical trials we had to perform essentially was people trying it and putting it on their own cervix. And then we had to have doctors inspect to see that it was correctly placed. My recollection is that in that clinical trial, 84% of the people were successful in placing the actual cervical cap on their own cervix. With that kind of result, the FDA cleared it for home use.
And we did have a question come in via email from a potential investor, and they were asking not only about how easy it is, but also if a potential customer is having trouble, is that something that they can go and see their doctor for, who can help them place that? Where would someone find help if they're struggling?
So that's a great question. It's not one we've really ever received, but I would tell you that I would always recommend talking to your doctor if you have concerns about it. That you may have a relationship with your doctor where they'd be happy to help in this particular situation. I would always encourage people to try it on their own first, because they may find out that it's easier than they think, that they're successful placing it on their own cervix. If they have concerns, always we'd say go talk to your doctor and see what you can organize with them.
And Mike, we have a video that also demonstrates that as well. And actually in the manual, for the product, there's a whole explanation of how to use it.
Great. And then can you talk to me a little bit about the efficacy of it, based on your studies, et cetera? How does this, if you're struggling to conceive, how does the first step conception kit help? Why is it effective? And then 2, how effective is it? And what are my chances of having to go on to something more intense like IVF?
Sure. So we need to be very clear that there are a lot of different reasons why people might struggle to get pregnant. Some of them are physical in nature. Maybe they have, some physical impediment that will require surgery to address. If you have a long-term issues getting pregnant, even after using our kit, we're always going to recommend you talk with your doctor. Having said all that, there are clinical trials countless clinical trials on the use of cervical caps where we've seen success rates of 11 to 44%. And that's highly dependent on the length of usage. Is it 1 month? Is it 6 months? In our clinical trial for the placement of the cervical cap, we were required to have people participate who were essentially post-ART, meaning they've gone through fertility treatments, they wanted babies, but they did not have any success. And the FDA required us to do that because the last thing they wanted was people participating who would get pregnant and then turn around and have an abortion. So I share that only to tell you that it wasn't a requirement to demonstrate the efficacy, but in that particular trial, 24% of the people got pregnant. We've also done studies to show that with our previous prescription version, which was a 3-month version of the kit, it had 3 1-month kits in it. The average couple would use, potentially maybe 1 or 1.5 kits of those. So it's 3-4 months of usage typically that we thought we'd see. I think the bottom line is you need to frame it from this perspective. Our kit is set up basically to take sperm, which lives best in 2 environments, in semen and in cervical mucus, and to isolate that sperm in a cervical cap while it's in semen and protect it while you place it directly on cervical mucus to maximize the number of viable sperm that are available to go conceive the egg. And that's valuable to anyone, whether they know if they have a fertility issue or whether they don't have one. It doesn't matter. Anyone who's trying to get pregnant, we represent a better first step. Now, if you continue to have issues, as I said, and as Michael has commented, that you may need to go find out and have further diagnostics and tests done to determine whether there's some other physical issues going on. But our product has been FDA cleared for low sperm count and low sperm motility, and we know people get pregnant with it. It's a valuable first step.
So imagine, maybe just to put in clarity, that if a typical first round of in vitro fertilization is over $23,000 for 1 round, our first step for 1 round is $99.
Yeah, and
difference.
It's a very big difference. I want to dive into the business model in just a second, but just to wrap up this discussion of the product itself, Mike, how long do you envision your average over-the-counter customer using your product before they move on to whether it be a doctor's appointment or more intense or invasive treatments?
So when you look at what doctors recommend, typically, if you go to a doctor and say, look, I'm trying to get pregnant, their typical answer, if you're under 35, is go try for a year before you come back. If you're over 35, they tell you try for 6 months. Now, the reality is they're starting to shorten that a bit. Our recommendation is always, if you've decided you want to get pregnant, start using our kit in the first month and give it a try for at least 3 months. And if you're really concerned, you can at 3 months go talk to your doctor and decide on a course of action and a time frame associated with it. If you're 35 or older, you're probably going to want to have that discussion right away. They may recommend trying our kit for a period of time, or you can try our kit for a period of time. But then if things aren't working out, to move on. So I would say, a 3 to 6 month window, that first 3 to 6 months is the perfect time to use our kit.
Great. And so, Michael, I want to dive back into what you were talking about, right? The kit's $99. So talk to me about the business model overall for the company. What's the plan? How do you plan to make money?
So the initial focus of our activity is the US market. And our goal initially via an e-commerce approach would be to market the product in the US market. And as part of that, with the success of that, we would hope to be attracting international partners for different parts of the world where these issues are exactly the same. The same millennial target market, the same issues with in vitro fertilization and cost. There are various avenues of revenue stream. Perhaps, Mike, you want to go through some of the different options in our menu of revenue stream.
Sure. I mean, first, as Michael said, the goal is to, through e-commerce initially, to sell a kit online, $99 for each month. We are exploring ways to stimulate more continued use. Some models potentially might be a subscription service where that if you sign up for monthly deliveries until you turn it off, it gets shipped, and to offer a small discount associated with that. Possibly a referral program for people who refer clients to us online. They can use a referral code or some fashion to actually stimulate discounts for the original referrer. There's also an opportunity inside here for promotional items, and that if you're a consumer healthcare company who's targeting people getting pregnant or forming families, to put promotional materials inside these boxes themselves as we ship them out as another way to generate revenue. There is also another way in terms of white labeling. We're fully open to the idea of, a Walgreens or a CVS or some other consumer healthcare product company white labeling the entirety of our kit and putting their brand name on it. We feel like the market would support it, and with the right partner, they might have an actual relationships and setup to actually dramatically impact sales.
And you mentioned those big pharmacies like Walgreens and CVS. I imagine that they're big players in the over-the-counter medical device space. So when you think about those two giants in particular, or any of these big giants, what is there a plan to try to get into those stores, or what might that look like?
So I would tell you that the answer is yes. We've had conversations with one of those large chains you've talked about. They actually clinically reviewed our kit and approved it, and basically said, we think it's a viable solution. Now, at the time, they were essentially dabbling in what I'll call a clinic environment, et cetera. But we feel that a lot more of these large retail pharmacy chains are moving very heavily into what I'll call primary care, so that they're looking to expand their presence in what we'll call, let's say, initial doctor office visits for a wide variety of issues. And one of them will be women's health. We fit very neatly inside that, especially when you get into discussions with them talking about the ability to add promotional materials inside the boxes in a white label format. If they sell our kit as a white label, they can actually put materials inside that drive specific promotions that they want to push forward. So it's a wonderful opportunity. I think the reality is that we need to demonstrate some success through e-commerce. I know we've received questions in the past about this idea of being, on the shelf in brick and mortar spaces. Typically, that's very competitive stuff to get on the shelf in a pharmacy. You need to be selling a certain volume for them to dedicate space for you. So it's somewhat dependent on us having some success in e-commerce, but potentially also in the form of a white label relationship with one of them where they might push it on their own.
So maybe, Rob, you mentioned the business model. So if you look again at just the US market and you take that 71 million millennials, if we take, again, the millennial group between ages 23 and 38, if we look at just 5% of that, that's 3.5 million people. And those 3.5 million, if they were to purchase 3 kits each in an annual year, that's $1 billion of revenue. Our revenue goals are more modest than that. If we reach that level, it would be wonderful, but realistically, our revenue goals for the year 2025 are $200 million in the United States market.
Awesome. Thanks. That gives us a kind of a sense of the scale of this for sure. And so, talk to me a little bit about kind of where the company's at today. What progress have you made so far? You've mentioned some clinical trials and things like that. So talk to me about kind of how far you've come, and then let's talk about next major milestones after that.
So there are a number of key, I think, issues on a product like this. One, intellectual property. So we have already approved intellectual property, not only for the US market, but a number of key international markets already in place. So this is a patent protected product, number one. The second issue is this was already cleared, as Mike mentioned earlier, by the FDA on a prescription basis now. Now, one of our goals and one of our milestones is to, obviously with the use of proceeds of any money we raise, is to get the clearance for over-the-counter use. But we do already today have clearance by the FDA for, based on the clinical trial evidence that we presented to the FDA, we have FDA clearance for a prescription version of this product.
Yeah, so I'll just add that what that helps us with is that, you know, when we get use of proceeds and we move forward, that we can reuse pretty much most all of the materials we originally submitted to the FDA. So we're very confident about getting, you know, a quick FDA clearance on the over-counter version. I would also tell you that we've done quite a bit of extensive work in identifying not only the manufacturing partners, but the actual kitting partners, branding partners, e-commerce enablement, and social media, along with all proposed pricing. So we're not in development. We're not an idea. We are a product ready for the market. We are ready to go. With the appropriate amount of fundraising, we will launch as quickly as possible. We hope to launch actually in under 12 months.
That's great. And that's a perfect transition to this fundraise itself. So you're raising money on Netcapital. You're off to the races. So talk to me about this fundraise, what you plan to use the funds for, and your plan to get from where you are now to kind of you know, how much capital, you know, whether it's selling out the full $1 million round or anywhere in between.
Great. So first and foremost, just to repeat, the first activity will be for getting the FDA clearance for the over-the-counter version of this product. And as we do that, we would also utilize funds from the investment round to manufacture the first lot of commercial product so that we can begin to start selling digitally. And then the other use of proceeds would be the digital marketing via social media of the product.
Obviously, would expand some healthcare, or headcount very, very minimally. We're very cautious about that. The biggest investment clearly will be to get the product to market. As we generate revenues, we will then recycle those revenues from sales to actually expand some of the other elements of it. There are some manufacturing investments we would obviously have to make in the form of molds for the cervical cap technology, especially if we start generating higher volumes of sales. But from our perspective, you know, $500,000 would get us well on our way towards launch. $1 million is a completely fully funded launch with headcount expansion and everything associated with a fully functional company. But we can actually get it rolling for a lot less than that.
Exciting. So for any of the participants, if you have any direct questions for Mike and Michael, please put them in the Q&A below. Otherwise, we're getting close to wrapping up. So as you guys think about, you know, the future for investors, where do you see the long-term future of the company going?
Well, there's several alternatives. This is probably not a company that we would look to be doing an IPO on. Quite frankly, we don't see that as a long-term goal. Most likely, as we are expanding our sales and revenue base in the United States, we'll be expanding our international business through partners. A number of these partners may already be in the United States and looking to enhance their position in the United States. And I think as we have those kinds of relationships, it might be, let's say, an exit for investors is that the company might get acquired by a national or international partner that sees the alignment and complementary activity with their own products in the field. So that's certainly one option. Private equity in the medical device space. So that's a very active area, constantly buying bits and pieces of companies to form new companies. This might be a very interesting acquisition for a private equity company to put into a a larger company that they're launching. And we also, Mike mentioned earlier, this white label concept with pharmacies. It may well be that the large pharmacy chains themselves look at this as something really attractive for them to take over, both a branded and white label version of the product. So there's several different options for an investor return on this via most likely an acquisition.
Yeah, and I'll add one last thing here, Rob, for people to consider. I know you want to get the questions, but if you go back even 3, 4, 5 years ago, the idea of, you know, fertility issues increasing, the number of people having problems, the usage going up, nobody really noticed it. Employers didn't notice it, insurance companies didn't notice it, but it's inescapable now. I mean, when you look at the sheer growth in the number of IVF cycles, the costs associated with the billions of dollars being spent worldwide on this, no one can deny there's an issue. And so when you look at that particular piece inside of it and what they call the femtech market space, in recent years, there's been over $1 billion invested in this space, except the vast majority of it is put on what I'll call fertility tracking. So apps of some kind to help people track when they ovulate, or pregnancy related apps. There's very little investment right now in the space where I'd actually call it treatment. And that's really important to understand because there aren't a lot of choices. We are one of those choices. So the reality is COVID's kind of distracted everybody from this right now briefly, but it's not going to be too far in the future when people wake up to the fact to say, hey, I want to have pregnant, and now all of a sudden they have no choice except the standard treatment path. This represents a wonderful opportunity for a market-ready solution for investors right now that actually works.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to Mike's comments about the femtech market. The $1 billion that he mentioned of investment going into femtech really breaks out into 3 different areas. One is fertility tracking, which is obviously via a series of apps, et cetera. The other is fertility solutions, of which we are an example of that. And then finally of pregnancy itself, which we're also into that segment of the market as well. So 3 different areas in this femtech investment market: fertility tracking, fertility solutions, and pregnancy itself.
Great, guys. I think that's a great place to end it. Mike and Michael, thank you guys so much for taking the time, spending some time with us, answering our questions. For everyone watching, as a reminder, Millenial Fertility is live on Netcapital. They're raising money. If this is something you want to invest in, you can do it there for as little as $100. There will be a link in this recording, in the description of the recording, to their page so you can learn more. And if you have additional questions for anyone on the Millenial Fertility team, you can post on their discussion board. So Mike, Michael, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert.
Fantastic. Thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate you taking the time. Have a good day.
Take care.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.